Big Oil and the Big Orange are in business together. Tennessee Athletics announced a branding rights deal with Pilot Corporation this week that's going to add money into Tennessee's coffers and going to add the Pilot name onto the field at Neyland Stadium and in branding around the stadium. But it's important to note, Neyland Stadium is not changing its name as part of this deal with Pilot. It is still going to be known as Neyland Stadium. Welcome into the Volunteer State. I'm Blake Topmeyer alongside the News Sentinels, Adam Sparks and John Adams. Adam, you had this story earlier this week of this big deal between Tennessee and Pilot. I think it's really no surprise that Tennessee is not changing the name of Neyland Stadium. It is staying Neyland Stadium, but it does strike a big deal with Pilot that's going to bring Pilot's branding onto the field and into the stadium. Sort of tell us how we got to this point, what it means for Tennessee to strike this deal with Pilot.
Well, Tennessee knew that they needed they're always looking for revenue, and that's Danny White's number one priority. That's what he's built his team around, about people that can bring in revenue. More revenue is needed each year, and with revenue sharing coming down the line soon for athletes, there's going to be even more of a need for revenue. So they're always looking for those opportunities. Obviously, they had the Food City Center deal where it shares the name with Thompson Bowling Arena. They felt like they couldn't go that step to where the name is shared, where it would be, Pilot Neyland Stadium or Neyland Stadium at Pilot Pavilion or whatever, whatever they could do. They felt like they couldn't go that extra step and disrupt the Neyland name. And I think they're right in that. Those are different things. Neyland, if you had messed with the Neyland name, there would have been riots on campus. But sharing it with Food City Center with Thompson Bowling, that's just a little different. Like, go out here on Market Square and grab 10 Tennessee fans and say, who is Thompson and who is Bowling? And most are not going to know. I mean, they had a hand in getting Thompson Bowling Arena built. That's admirable, but they weren't iconic coaches or anything like Neyland was. So they knew they needed to get Tennessee knew they needed to get the revenue money with a corporate sponsorship deal and give up really maximize the value that they had with the stadium, but without changing the name because they would get so much of a backlash from fans. And they thread the needle. I've written that a few times this week. I really think they thread the needle in that by saying Neyland Stadium preserved by Pilot. Now, I think it's a pretty savvy move to do it that way. By the way, I've been told that preserved came from Danny White, that he thought up that idea, not sponsored by or anything, that preserved. The cynic in me, the cynical reporter in me, sort of laughs at that a little bit, because the idea that they sold was that Pilot is protecting Neyland Stadium from all these other corporations that were, knocking down the door to take over the name. And Tennessee needed just, that white knight of a company to fight them off. And Pilot stepped forward and gave tens and tens of millions of dollars to do so. But for what Tennessee was trying to accomplish, it was a really, really good move, because they got that revenue, but they kept the name of Neyland Stadium. And, I went over there this week and looked at it. There's some Pilot logos around the stadium now. There is on the east side, which is like opposite press box, so it'd be the visiting side. There's a big sign there that says Home of the Vols, which a similar sign used to be in the stadium. It says Home of the Vols, and there'll be a Pilot logo on the side of that. If you look down on the field around the 25-yard line, there's Pilot written in just white paint on either side of the field. There's nothing in the middle of the field. And so, when I walked out there and saw it this week, I thought, okay, I could have covered the season opener, and it would have taken me maybe 2 quarters to even notice that was on there. It's just
don't tell the folks at Pilot that, Adam. If they know it's taking you 2 quarters to notice their name on the field, they're going to be wondering why they're putting their name on the field.
Well, I also can cover a 3.5-hour football game, and then I'm asked 5 minutes later what color were the uniforms Tennessee was wearing, or whoever was wearing, and I can't remember. I'm not observant in that way that fans are, but I know a lot of fans have seen pictures of it. A lot of them have been like, I'll deal with it. I understand it's money. A portion of fans, predictably, have thought that, somebody came in and urinated down the aisle of the church building sort of thing. How dare you disrupt this hallowed ground? I think that's a very, very, very small segment of the fan base. I think also that's the segment of the fan base that's probably not listened to this podcast because they didn't read like the first 5 sentences of the story that explains that this is not Pilot Stadium. It's still Neyland Stadium. But I think most people are realists and they understand you're in a race for money now in college football. And this is probably the quickest way outside of getting an enormous donation from somebody. This is the quickest way to bring in a lot of revenue in a short period of time. And so I applaud Tennessee actually for pulling this off and still the majority of the fan base being okay with it.
Yeah, I want to get more to the money in a moment because I know you have some insight into what that looks like, might look like, Adam. But John, come to you. You've been writing about this possibility for a while now. The possibility of would Tennessee change the name of its stadium, what that would look like with the fan base if it did, and kind of how we got to this point. The NCAA earlier this summer opened the door to these sponsorship deals to put the name of a sponsor on the football field. Before, the only way you could have the name of a company on your field was if that was the name of the stadium. You saw that in the case of Kentucky when Commonwealth Stadium, they sold the rights to that to Kroger. It became Kroger Field. That's why you could see the name of Kroger on Kentucky's field for years now. But for everybody else, if your stadium was Bryant-Denny or if your stadium was Neyland Stadium, you couldn't have a company sponsorship logo on the field. That changed this year, and so now Tennessee's sort of at the vanguard here of striking a deal of this kind. But from your perspective, John, what do you think of this deal, and what do you think the reaction would have been? Shudder to think if the name of the stadium had changed as part of this.
If it had changed, my inbox would have been full. I still got some negative emails about it. And I understand how fans are about tradition. And I think some of them, they don't take this just at face value. They take it as another step closer to the abyss and where we're headed. This was just the opening act. Yeah, it's still named Neyland, but what if somebody comes up with more money? I think they see it that way. I think it's important to understand that, we're dealing with, this is pretty much pro football right now. And players are getting paid. Everybody's getting paid. You've got to pay reparations to players. There's so much money involved. If you're going to win and you're going to be successful, you got to make a lot of money. That's just a fact now. So maybe if you wanted to keep all the traditions and not change a thing, you could keep your tradition and cuddle up to that when you're getting hammered by Georgia or Florida or somebody. But money can turn into wins. And I think that's an important part of this. I think it's a great deal for Tennessee. I do, after listening to Adam talk about doesn't know if he'd noticed those Pilot logos for a couple of quarters. If I were a Pilot executive, I'd be apoplectic right now. In fact, to counter Adam's critical response, I'm going to try and weave that into my columns, game day columns. Say a touchdown pass from Nico. Nico dropped back to pass, looked to his right and spotted the Pilot logo, then turned left and threw a 30-yard strike to Brew McCoy. That kind of thing. Just I kind of would feel sorry if Pilot didn't get recognized with all the money it's spending.
And he might drop the price of its fountain sodas right after that sentence. And after the game, Nico will fuel up with a fountain soda and a glazed donut.
Nico's health preserved by Pilot.
Adam, the financial particulars of this, the deal, you have the terms. We sort of know the length of the deal, but it's a little bit murky, right? And then also murky is the actual financial reward that Tennessee is going to be getting from this, right? Fill us in on those details.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anybody that read it for 30 seconds noticed there was not a dollar figure in there. There was in the Food City Center Thompson Bowling Arena deal. That was 10 years, $20 million for TBA Food City Center. So that's $2 million a year. I think this one is closer to double that. So that's $2 million a year. I think the value of Neyland Stadium likely puts this around double that amount, which would be, let's say, $4 million a year. But the terms of this can go as far as 20 years. So twice as much. So, 4 million times 20 years is $80 million. I'm not reporting that as fact. But I think we're in the ballpark, 60 million, 70 million, 80 million. I think that's probably around what Tennessee got. And if you think about the renovations that they're doing right now, this whole enormous phase one of renovations that Neyland Stadium has been under is 347 million, I think. So you're talking about a quarter of that paid just from this. It's pretty substantial. And it's things like that you're going to have to do. If you want to keep your ticket prices from going way, way, way up, they're always going to go up, but way up. This is one way to do it. Money is fungible. So if you want some really good players that can share in revenue, you should want deals like this because that money gets moved around all to sort of the same areas in the athletic department. Eventually it will. Blake, you and I were talking off air before the pod about Alabama's AD when the logo rule was changed to where you can put logos on the field. Now Pilot is on the field at Shields Watkins Field at Neyland Stadium. And the Alabama AD had said at the time, this is back in June, July, that he didn't think Alabama would do that. Like they're sort of above that. There's so much prestige and tradition at Alabama. Their uniforms don't change. They don't have alternate uniforms and all that, which is commendable that they've been able to hold on to that for so long, I guess. But I think you're in danger of eating your words down the line because you can hang on to all that tradition and give up none of it. And you could get just a few years down the road and Caleb DeBoer walk into the office, if he's still a coach there, and say, hey, how come we can't get players? How come we can't do facilities? How come we can't share all this revenue? How come the NIL that's under the athletic department cannot be as fully funded as Tennessee or Texas or whoever? Well, it's because we don't want a gas station's name on the 25-yard line. That's why. Well, if you can hang on to that, I applaud you, but I just don't think that's where the future of college football is going.
I don't either. And Adam, as you were talking about the financials of this deal, talking about the potential tens of millions of dollars that you think this is going to add up to, and you were talking about that $60 to $80 million figure over the course of 20 years. I thought, well, put differently, that's one Jimbo Fisher buyout right there. And I was also reminded by another quote from this summer. You mentioned the quote from Greg Byrne about what Alabama may or may not do. I'm also struck by a quote from Trev Alberts, the athletic director at Texas A&M, who over the summer said, college athletics does not have a revenue problem. It has an expense problem. And I think this deal is an example of that. When college athletics usually lifts up a rock, there's more money underneath of it. They have not run dry yet, despite what administrators might want you to believe. They have not run dry yet in terms of revenue generating options. Now, at some point, maybe they will reach the end of the road, but they're not at the end of the road yet. And this deal that Tennessee struck helps prove it. Now, the question is, will there be any attempt to rein in expense? And an athletic department like Tennessee might not have to operate in that space. It could still operate in the space of spend big, earn big. But if you want to spend big, you're going to have to earn big as well. And that's what a deal like this will do. John, when you hear fans say, like, where does this end? is this an intermediate step toward years and years down the road, maybe Neyland Stadium is not known at Neyland Stadium? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think Neyland Stadium is going to be the name in perpetuity, or do you see this maybe as being an intermediate step, and it might come to the day where the name of the stadium would change?
Well, it's hard for me to imagine Tennessee doing away with the Neyland name. I just think I mean, there would be protest. I just think it would be a bad PR move, and I wouldn't want to be the business that displaced Neyland. I mean, we're in the middle of a cancel culture. That might be an economic, financial disaster for a business company to take. They could be they are the business. They would be known as the business that took away General Neyland. I don't think you want to be known as that. So I think General Neyland is safe. I really do. I'm just still I'm sorry, but I'm kind of preoccupied trying to think of ways I can work Pilot into game columns. I'm kind of stuck on that.
John Adams' column preserved by Pilot. Maybe you should trying to strike your own deal, John.
Well, see, for example, some hotshot quarterback comes into Neyland and picks apart Tennessee's secondary. We've seen that happen before.
Yes, we have.
Tennessee secondary was a disgrace to the Pilot logo Saturday afternoon. And Adam, where is the on the field? Where exactly will the logo be?
It's the Pilot name. It's on, I think, the 25-yard line on both sides.
Okay. What if an opposing team comes out and starts jumping up and down on the Pilot logo? How will the Volunteers react to that?
What if that team is sponsored by like Shell or something, or Weigel? It wouldn't be Weigel's. Weigel's would be more local.
Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's. There you go. There was, I got an email from somebody that wants Buc-ee's to be in Lindsey Nelson Stadium, so you can continue with the same theme of commercialism.
Buc-ee's would be Texas or Texas A&M. It'd be it's like a Houston thing, right? The first Buc-ee's ever were in Texas,
but they're going national now. I mean, they're all over the place. We got
that is an interesting thing, because there's a number of SEC schools. I was talking to somebody in the conference about this yesterday. There's a number of SEC schools that don't have a Pilot, so to speak. Like Pilot is a huge, nationally global corporation that has its headquarters a few miles from campus. I mean, I don't know. Does Starkville have one of those? Does Fayetteville have one of those? I mean, there's only so many corporations that would shell out that kind of money. And I will say, I mean, all the jokes aside about not noticing the logo or whatever, I do think Pilot is getting some value in this, because for years and years, because of the Haslams, Pilot was sort of synonymous with the University of Tennessee. It was known that those two were linked. And when Berkshire Hathaway took over Pilot, I guess it was last year, or early this year, when the purchase finished, I think there was maybe a sense that is Pilot now going to distance itself from UT and or Knoxville? And instead, you saw the new leaderships, the CEO, Adam Wright, who, by the way, used to be a college football player and a NFL player for a short time. And he looks like he could play today. He instead doubled down. He leaned into it and essentially said, "Oh, you think Pilot was a supporter of UT before? I'll show you it's even more of a supporter now." So I do think they're going to get some value out of having the Pilot logo all around the stadium. It is much more noticeable, by the way, around the stadium than I thought it was on the field. So they're going to get some value out of that. I just don't think that I don't think there's a lot of schools, maybe even the majority of schools in the conference, that have that company locally that will do that. Everybody's got a local company, but not everybody's got one that can, give $50-80 million or whatever.
Adam, I want to follow up on something John said, because I think John made a good point like, when I asked sometime down the road, do we think the Neyland Stadium name would change? Would a company slap its name on the stadium? And John pointed out that not only would there be blowback for Tennessee if they changed the name of Neyland Stadium, there could be blowback for the company that would put its name on the stadium. And you actually wrote about that, and Pilot's new CEO talked about that, and he spoke about that very subject. So fill us in on that, what Pilot's perspective is on that, because I think it's interesting. The obvious take would be, well, yeah, Tennessee would endure blowback, but yeah, I think there's some truth to the matter to where it would be, potentially ill-advised for a company to go down that road as well. And I know Pilot's CEO spoke to you about that.
Yeah, when I talked to the CEO, it's Pilot CEO Adam Wright. He's only been in Knoxville, I think, a little over a year now. His quote was he thought it would be brand detraction if Pilot was the one to take the name off of Neyland Stadium. I think that's absolutely true. And again, I think that's why it was very savvy of how they worded this, not sponsored by, not brought to you by, or even fueled by, which wouldn't have been a bad option, but preserved by Pilot. You get the alliteration, which is good. We love words here, but you get the alliteration, but you also get the preserved, which is, we're on your side, UT. We're gonna make sure that this place, the traditions of this place, are preserved. So I do think Pilot gets a pretty good bump in that. I don't think Neyland is ever coming off the stadium. I think if it does, it probably won't be in our lifetime. And so who knows what football even looks like then. The way that Tennessee does a lot of these things are they run this across a handful of alums. I mean, before these decisions are made, Peyton Manning and Al Wilson know about them. Heath Schuler knows about them. At the thing this week, the one in the daytime where media came to, and then there was another social event with Pilot employees that I went to later that night at Neyland. Al Wilson was there and spoke. Heath Schuler was there. I think Peyton Manning, I think they released a video where he sort of gave his backing to this deal. These things behind closed doors are brought to these guys and said, hey, you got your finger on the pulse of the fan base better than anybody. If we did A, how would the fans react? If we did B, how would the fans react? And, I think they told them, keep Neyland. Don't ever, ever, ever touch Neyland. But yeah, you could put a corporation somehow beside that or on the field, and people would be cool with it. I mean, eventually, I think Danny White has been really good about doing some bold things that he knows will tick off a portion of the fan base for a few days, for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months, but then long-term will get the benefit out of it. If you think about how he changed the ticketing thing back right when he got here 2 or 3 years ago, where there was a lot of deals throughout Neyland Stadium where people had handshake deals from back in the 70s, 80s or whatever. And they were getting their tickets like for free or for $100 or whatever. And somebody sitting beside them was paying thousands of dollars for the same tickets. He went in and ripped all those agreements up. And I know some people have argued about the legality of that. They've come through that fine, but he said that's stupid how this is done. So we're going to go to more of a equitable ticket program. Everybody's going to pay the same for every for certain seats. And some people were angry about that. And then he got past the blowback, and it was a long-term plus. And I think that's how he judges things. I'll take the blowback for a little bit from a portion of the fan base. It'll be fine in the end. And I think that's what this decision was. It's been overly positive, I think, but the little negative that Tennessee has gotten, I think, will fade pretty quickly. I think the next step in this is like what happens with Lindsey Nelson Stadium and those types of corporate deals that could be coming, which I think will be coming.
Yeah, I want to unpack that idea, John. I'm going to come to you first, and we'll kick back for Adam's thoughts, because that is the next logical idea, right? I mean, Thompson Bowling already partnership now with Food City. Neyland Stadium has knotted up with Pilot. and now the focus naturally turns to Lindsey Nelson. John, do you think it would be acceptable for Tennessee to change the name of Lindsey Nelson Stadium? You're saying taking General Neyland's name off the stadium, that's a no-go. Not going to happen. Not going to fly. Not going to fly for Tennessee or the company. How about Lindsey Nelson Stadium? How do you digest that one and evaluate the idea of that name changing?
Yeah, that would be a tougher call. Now, I'm biased because I got to know Lindsey when he lived here before he died. One of Tennessee's most accomplished and most famous alumni. There's no telling how many. I don't have any idea. I was talking to Bob Kessling about this, how many Hall of Fames Lindsey Nelson would be in. It probably double figures, but including National Hall of Fames, the Baseball Hall of Fame. I mean, his name has been associated not just with UT, but Notre Dame football, 49ers football, the New York Mets. So very famous and a huge personality and just a wonderful man. So I would be very opposed to his name not being on that stadium. But I don't know that the general populace would, because it's not as though Lindsey Nelson built Tennessee baseball into a national power. He wasn't a baseball coach or a baseball player, but he was just, again, he was such an accomplished person. One of the best people I've ever met in all my years of covering sports. Just an exceptional person. He seemingly had a photographic memory, the way he could recall things. So that would bother me, and I don't know how you would do it, but I don't know, particularly fans under 50. I don't know if that would mean so much to them, but I think it would to older fans who knew who Lindsey Nelson was and who actually knew Lindsey. He's a big personality and very outgoing, so a lot of people did know him. It's funny when they named that stadium. And Tennessee baseball has been very down at times. I mean, way down. And it was that way for quite a while before Tony Vitello made it the program in college baseball. But at times I thought it was almost offensive to me that somebody as exceptional as Lindsey Nelson would have to have his name on that stadium. It just seemed it didn't fit. I mean, he was too accomplished and he did too much in baseball and other sports. It's just not right to do that to Lindsey.
Adam, let me run this by you, and I want your response to John as well. But let me run this idea by you. I believe the field at Lindsey Nelson Stadium has not been named, right? I mean, and in the baseball world, you have Wrigley Field, you have Busch Stadium. Why could you not have two? Why could you not sell the name of the field, the surface inside Lindsey Nelson Stadium, and preserve the name, such and such field, whatever company field at Lindsey Nelson Stadium? Do you think there's some merit to that idea? And then, what do you think about the possibility of the name Lindsey Nelson coming off the stadium itself?
Well, there's two or three options here with Lindsey Nelson Stadium. There's also sort of the added obstacle that to get to a certain price tag for that, it's going to be different than Thompson Bowling Arena and Neyland Stadium because it's not elevated. Neyland Stadium you can see for miles and miles, and by the way, you can see the Pilot logos and Pilot on the jumbotrons from far away. So Pilot is getting its bang for its buck in that way. Thompson Bowling Arena, if you drive down Neyland Drive, you're looking square at Thompson Bowling Arena. It says Food City Center in huge letters. They're getting their bang for their buck in that. Lindsey Nelson Stadium is in the middle. It's more in the inside of campus. It's not elevated, so you're not going to get as much for that if you're just sharing the name. But then again, you may not get a whole lot to give up the name. So Tennessee's going to have to be shrewd in how they do a deal for that. So that's a big consideration, that it's just not going to be the same. It's not going to be as visible. So who's going to pay for that, and how much would they pay, and how much would they want for that dollar amount? Now, what they could do with it, you could do Lindsey Nelson Stadium and then a corporate field name. You could maybe even do Lindsey Nelson Field and do the stadium as corporate. I don't think they would do that because you're used to saying Lindsey Nelson Stadium. I think another thought, and I think Tennessee has considered this, is that they're doing so much renovations now that you could easily do Lindsey Nelson Press Box or Media Center or whatever and have a big sign, because he was a broadcaster, and then you could maybe give away the stadium or the field name to corporate rights, naming rights. And so Lindsey Nelson would still get his part. I mean, John just talked about how, Hall of Fame broadcaster, he did not play at Tennessee or coach at Tennessee, so it is a little different. So you could pay homage to him with a press box or a media center or whatever there, but still be able to sell the naming rights. I think they're considering all those things. And again, it depends on the price tag. Lindsey Nelson is an interesting one, because John and I talked about this a day or two ago, is that if you're ranking these, Neyland is at the top for obvious reasons. Thompson and Bowling, that was a booster, a benefactor, and then a UT president, if I remember right. Of those three, they're third. So Lindsey Nelson is then second. But is Lindsey Nelson's name closer to Neyland or closer to Thompson and Bowling? I think if you ask different generations, you're going to get different answers, because with some, probably, John, you're probably right, it's probably about 50 and over. They're going to say, I mean, Lindsey Nelson's a really big name historically, and it's not Neyland, but that's a big name, and we got to preserve that. Preserve is the word of the podcast episode. But others would say Thompson and Bowling. I grew up saying that, but I didn't really know who Thompson and Bowling are. I also grew up saying Lindsey Nelson Stadium, but unless I went to Wikipedia, I didn't know who Lindsey Nelson was. Now, that's a shame to some extent. I knew who Lindsey Nelson was. I'm 44. But I think a large portion of the younger fan base would probably say Lindsey Nelson is closest to Thompson and Bowling, which means you could share the name. Older generations would say that's closer to Neyland. That's a name you don't touch. And so Tennessee's got to weigh out all that. And again, I think they'll say, how much would the backlash be, and how long would it last, and how much is that worth? There's an equation there where you would do that.
All right, well, you can find all of Adam's coverage and John's commentary on this branding agreement between Tennessee and Pilot over at KnoxNews.com. That coverage has been preserved by the Knoxville News Sentinel, and we appreciate you listening to another edition of the Volunteer State, preserved by insert your company here.